Welcome to our afternoon session on disinformation and democracy in 2024. I'm Bethany Allen, head of China investigations at ASPE. This year, fully half of the world's population will go to the polls. For many countries, it's the first round of elections in which AI-powered disinformation is a major concern. That's highlighted the growing and ever-changing role that disinformation poses, the ever-changing risks that disinformation poses to democracies and democratic societies. Disinformation campaigns can obscure facts and create a sense of helplessness in the societies that are targeted by them. That's a tactic we've seen from Russia in its effort against Ukraine and against the US and elsewhere. Disinformation campaigns can also try to get populaces to distrust their own government, and that's a tactic that we've seen from China as it targets Taiwan with disinformation. Disinformation can inflame divisions and sow chaos in target societies as well. We've seen that not just from Russia, but also now increasingly from China and from Iran, and even some smaller actors such as Cuba. And governments and political parties can deploy disinformation even domestically to target their critics and to target their political opponents. Maria, you are on the front lines of AI's effects in the online information ecosystem. In fact, you have been personally targeted by state-backed deepfakes. How is AI changing disinformation?
Oh, gosh. I think let me break it down into three things first, right? And these are things that we've learned both from experience and then from the data that we have now. I think the first is, and from the Philippines, the information operations, which is the way I would characterize disinformation, right? Concerted efforts to change the public narrative. Globally, the first ones that we really saw were around 2014. And that's not a coincidence that that's also when we had, that was when Crimea, the meta-narrative was seeded that was used to annex Crimea, so that was 2014. Around that time period, that was also when the name Marcos information operations began, that changed the name Marcos from the kleptocrat that was ousted in a people power revolt in 1986 to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. By 2016, so it took roughly 2 years to percolate on social media, 2016, the political dominoes began to fall. And the first was the Philippines with the election of Rodrigo Duterte in May of 2016. About a month later, you had Brexit, and then you had all of the different elections after that. November was the Trump elections. You had the Catalan elections, and then by February 2017, you had the French elections, which, by the way, at that point, Facebook took down 30,000 to 50,000 fake accounts. So the first disinformation was really pounding a lie a million times. You say a lie a million times, it becomes a fact. And this is the first generation of AI, which is on social media, right? The first contact with it. In the Nobel lecture in 2021, I said, again, based on the data, if you can pound a lie a million times and it becomes a fact, you can't tell the difference. So if you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, how do you have a shared reality? Without a shared reality, you cannot have democracy, let alone solve complex problems like climate change, security, right? So that's really the first time, and I say that because we forget, like all day today we've been talking about AI, but we forget what Yuri Andropov, the former KGB chair, former head of the Soviet Union, said about disinformatia. He said, disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become an addict, a changed person. we have been addicts globally since 2014. And that has an impact on our societies. And then you move it to the next phase, which is what we've been talking about today, is generative AI, right? I mean, we can talk about this more later, the difference in these two technologies, but generative AI is only going to change our realities even more. Because the first part with social media essentially cloned each of us. If you're on social media, is anybody here not on social media? See, there's no one. Everyone here is on social media. So generative AI, so in social media, essentially every single platform you're on clones you. It's not an opt-in. It is we have no choice. So if you're on Facebook, there are more than 2,300 different sets of data that they have gathered from different parts of the world, and you are cloned. And then AI comes in and takes all of our clones and makes it the motherlode database that is then used to micro-target. Micro-target is not advertising, the old media advertising. Micro-targeting takes your weakest moment to a message and sells it to a company or a country. Generative AI splinters that, there's already insidious manipulation that's pulled us, and then generative AI comes in and creates deepfakes. You mentioned deepfakes. I am not a politician, but I have had so many deepfakes that have been done. November 2022 was OpenAI rolled out ChatGPT. My first one came from a Russian scam network where they had me selling crypto. I didn't say it. It sounded like me. They took an old video and synced my lips to it. And then the most recent one I have, I'm telling people with diabetes that you should throw away your insulin and get this, like, there's several things. Anyway, I'm so sorry, I went right into it, right?
No, that's actually quite interesting, because in those examples, you're seeing some different motivations. There's the state-backed a motivation that would be in alignment with some state-backed actors, let's say, which is to damage your personal reputation because of the work that Rappler has done, the investigative work in the Philippines. But there's also probably a commercial motivation there as well. Somebody is selling crypto. They would love to borrow your face to sell even more of it. And that's very interesting. I mean, we talk a lot, especially here, about the state-backed nature of disinformation campaigns. Yes. But tell me more about maybe the commercial aspect or the economic aspect of AI and disinformation.
We took this apart, and I'll tweet. I hate to send you to X, but I will tweet the stories we did that when we traced it back. There are two ways that deep fakes spread, right? The distribution, again, are the same social media platforms that are used to, the design of social media platforms. We talked about design today. By design, these social media platforms spread lies faster and further than facts. 2018 MIT study said that lies spread 6 times further. And then our data in the Philippines in 2017 showed that if you lace it with fear, anger, and hate, it spreads even faster, it goes viral. That doesn't discount the seeding of a meta-narrative that is then pounded and pushed up to the surface again and again, depending on the motivation. So the way these deep fakes now operate is it walks into this social media platforms, which spreads lies faster, right? So it does get the distribution there, but how do they get it to you? They take out sponsored ads. So the company makes money in 2 ways: by distributing the lie, the deep fake, and then by taking money from whoever wants to distribute the lie. The Russian scam network on crypto is really kind of strange to me, and we're trying very hard to go deeper into it. You'll see, I'll tweet it, but you'll see that they also spread it on Bing, right? So it's a Microsoft platform. And in that sense, what is it because the ads that they were putting were all about me lying, which was to get you to click. And then once you see it, I'm selling crypto. I'm like very confused by myself.
Well, I think that this has been a theme in your work, and you said recently that social media CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are, quote, the largest dictators.
Oh, yeah.
What did you mean by that? And what should social media companies be doing to combat information operations and AI?
I think the first step is for all of us in the room to realize that this technology, which all of us carries in our pockets or in our person, is the least regulated industry globally. Least regulated. Just for safety measures, we should consider this much more, governments in the room, right? But I said this, I wrote a book called How to Stand Up to a Dictator. It was published the same week that ChatGPT rolled out. And it was funny because one of the first, in San Francisco, someone came up to me and then asked about my book, and there it was, you know. Again, let's not even go into copyright and everything else that goes with that. But what was fascinating about How to Stand Up with a Dictator is I put the data in. It shows you the insidious manipulation, different layers of this. It shows you how a growth algorithm, and this is used by all social media platforms, how a growth algorithm based on friends of friends, right? They A/B tested this, and they found out that if I recommend a friend of yours, you would be more likely to click that to grow your network, in which case you would grow Facebook's network or X, right? So when you do that, and we each grow our networks, the platform grows, more money comes in. In How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I compared Rodrigo Duterte and how he became the Philippines' most powerful leader within 6 months because our institutions collapsed. And it wasn't that Filipinos changed. It was the level of fear that he could deploy. And all of those online attacks that came up then became legal cases coming top down a year later in 2017. Sorry, I'll make the answer shorter in this one. The hard part for ordinary people is that if governments don't act to protect us, no one will protect us. Because in April of 2022, Dmitry Muratov and I, along with about 300 other Nobel laureates, civil society groups, largely in Europe, because there was a question earlier here about, you know, well, does that mean is Europe not as innovative? I would say Europe cares more about the safety of its people than making money off of it, right? Thank you for, you know, GDPR, the DSA Act, the DMA, because all of this filters to the global south as well. Sorry, let me throw it back to you. I guess, you know, if you don't, I'll end with this and then we can go. Marichka Shaki, a former member of parliament, along with Kaja Kallas, who became Estonia's prime minister, were sent to Silicon Valley by the EU, and Marichka stayed in Silicon Valley for 6 years. She has a book coming out in September. It's called The Tech Coup, essentially saying that in plain sight, these tech companies carried out a coup. And you know what it did? They did. That's why I call Mark Zuckerberg the world's biggest dictator. No offense, Mark, you know. And the problem is, for countries, if you do not put in place the safety measures, guardrails we would call them, right? If you don't do that, every day you do not do that, the tech companies gain more power. So this is a race against time, and it is something very simple. I'll end with just these 3 things. The impact of the technology that Eric Schmidt was telling us to roll out without any kind of guardrails that we must, for innovation's sake, continue rolling out. The impact is personal, societal, and global in scope. Because what we have seen with just social media is democracy's death by 1,000 cuts. Wow, I'm sorry. You maybe have some coffee.
I'll ask just one final question before we pivot to the Q&A portion.
Sure.
To your point about Europe caring more for the safety of its residents and citizens through the laws it has enacted, the U.S. has failed to regulate
Yes.
data privacy in this way. What are the steps?
Until today, it has no real data privacy laws.
Indeed.
Right?
What are the steps that the U.S. government should take that you would really want to see? And of course, the actions that the U.S. government takes are so disproportionately powerful in this space
Because they were originally American companies.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, and still dominate the space. So, what would you want to see?
Again, in the Nobel lecture, my lawyer said I should take this phrase out, but I didn't. It's to reform or revoke Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, because that gave the companies impunity. Right? And the rest of the world had to deal with it. I think two things happened around the mid-90s. The first was that commercial companies, tech that was developed, DARPA developed this, right, was handed over to private companies. And then the private companies were allowed to use surveillance for profit. That's the first mistake. I think the second mistake, without any guidelines, right? And the second one that went hand in hand with that was advertising as a model, which meant that they can take anything we do and turn it into data and profit off of it. Sorry, earlier I said that there was a 10-point action plan that Dmitry Muratov and these Nobel laureates had pushed out. Let me summarize that one in 3 buckets. And the 10 points were largely sent to the EU because the EU was the only one that was effectively doing anything, really. And when it did that, the tech lobby at the EU went up to 120 million euros a year, right? So 3 points in that. The first, stop surveillance for profit. We have rights. Second, stop coded bias. Because if you are a woman, LGBTQ+, if you are marginalized in the real world, you are further marginalized online. And then the third one, and you will see this, journalism as an antidote to tyranny. There is a rise of authoritarian rulers around the world who are being elected democratically because the manipulation happens at the cellular level of democracy. And this is what we're seeing playing out around the world. Australia, you're great because you have mandatory voting and you have some shock absorber against it. But 2024 is the tipping point year. And while some people say, it hasn't been as bad a year, I'd suggest looking closer at how much it's back to Yuri Andropov's drug addicts. There are times when a drug addict can be normal, and there are times when they crave the drug. So that's the state of our world.
That's a perfect way to pivot into our Q&A, so I'd be glad to take questions. It is a bit hard to see.
I depressed you.
Well, while we're waiting for people to formulate what they want to ask, I will ask another one. Do you view China-backed information operations as a serious concern for the Philippines?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting now to look at, and because we're in our part of the world, right? As Ukraine was 2022, so the meta-narratives were used again 8 years later by Putin to invade Ukraine itself, and now Gaza. And as the United States looks towards its own elections, we are seeing, again, I'll use the phrase death by 1,000 cuts, or Madeleine Albright would call it slicing a salami. Watch South China Sea, or what we in the Philippines call the West Philippine Sea. On June 16th, you came as close to a shooting war as anyone would have wanted to see, and the Philippines is doing its best with what we have. The alliances in the region certainly are going in, but the information operations, I will put it on X as well, the seeding of meta-narratives and the kind of information operations that we're getting. In 2018, we published a report on Russian disinformation in the Philippines and how a lot of it was coming from the far right in Canada, of all strange places. The world is, it's global in scope, right? What happens in Australia happens in the Philippines. I mean, even in terrorism, which is the last time I really came in for a security conference here in Australia, your Mantiki 3 is connected to the Philippines, which was the training ground, along with Indonesia, which was the theater of operations of Al-Qaeda-linked terrorism. The world is far more global with social media, with generative AI. And I'll say one last thing, and I'll throw it back to you. I didn't really answer your question about what we went through, but at the worst, in 2016, I was battling 90 hate messages per hour. 90 hate messages per hour. And it was something I'd never dealt with. This is my 38th year as a journalist. I've dealt with terrorists. I've dealt with, governments. I've dealt with all of it. This thing is brand new, and it has both psychological impact, and then it has an impact on the people who are seeing it and are affected by it. It's a fake grassroots. Astroturfing is the right phrase, right? So what you think, really, the question is, did you have individual will in coming up with what you think? And the last part of that is, if you live on social media, think about your kids, Gen Z. If they live on social media, they get their information on social media, they cannot help but be affected by this.
So we have one right here, and then we'll go to the back right here.
Yes, thank you for the excellent comments that you made. Under your new president, President Marcos, he seems like a very moderate person, a pro-Western person, and of course many Western countries are very happy about that.
Yes.
But how do you judge the current state of democracy in the Philippines? Are we all being suckered into this?
No, thank you for asking the question. And our secretary, the DOST, Renato Solodum, is also here with us. Look, I say all the time that we went from hell to purgatory. Largest Roman Catholic nation, right, in Asia. So my cases, I had 11 criminal charges, 21 investigations. My 11 criminal charges are now down to 2. So just lifting the level of fear has allowed our justice system to operate and has allowed our cases to go away. There have been none. Having said that, are we perfect? We're far from it. There could definitely be greater transparency in terms of information, but the impact of the Duterte administration, I think, will be felt for a decade after. This is why you have to be careful. In 2016, I was in Mountain View in the United States saying that what happened to us is coming for you. And it did. It took 6 years before January 6th happened in the United States. I hate to be right on these things. Please prove me wrong. But for the Philippines, I'm here. I mean, I'm not in jail. And for a period of time, I really thought I was going to go to jail. I mean, I had over a century of jail sentence during the worst parts. And now we have a government that is open for business in the sense of the world. It has turned back to Western alliances. Also, I mean, maybe let me not do Western and I won't do the global North, global South. Let me just say that the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea, remains the greatest flashpoint in the region. You would know this, right? What is China really up to? Why is it slicing the salami? And is there an opportunity? What happens as security is tested? I didn't really answer your question all the way. Until my last two criminal charges are thrown out, then I could say.
I think we have right back here. Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Melissa de Zwart. I'm from the University of Adelaide. And continuing the religious theme, I would sing hallelujah to the repeal of Section 230. It was introduced, to help a new industry thrive, and I think we've gone well past that. So my question to you is, but is it too late to repeal it? And is there a fear, is there a risk that they would just then go and domicile themselves, somewhere else? So how are we going to, if it was at all conceivable, how could we avoid the what next after the repeal of 230? Thank you.
Thanks so much for that question. I mean, look, I'm part of a bipartisan group that was put together by Dick Gephardt in the US, and Marianne Franks is coming out with a book in September as well. She's pushing forward, she's leading the group that is looking to sunset Section 230. Is it too late? Look, as long as you allow impunity, impunity will happen, right? Please put the laws in place that protect us. This is very simple. It's like saying let me build a building with no building codes. I mean, that's kind of the world that we've created with this technology. We didn't talk about this, but beyond the information, I'm a journalist because I know information is power. And this corruption of the public information ecosystem must stop, or you cannot govern. I feel sorry for people who have to govern, for public leaders, for women leaders who are constantly attacked online. There is no solution for it. But sorry, last way to answer that also is that there's already an effort out. We cannot wait. I think this is the part that's really scary. I don't know what else you need to see. Genocide in Myanmar? Check, right? The dictator. Hi, Mark, my friend. Because Rappler is a partner to every single tech company. Because tech is critical in our lives. But the way it is designed and the way you have allowed it to flourish manipulates us at the cellular level.
Thank you so much, Maria. Join me in thanking Maria for her comments today.